Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fourth webinar in the NAW series, Adding Value in a Post-Pandemic World, New Leadership Strategies for Distributors. Today's topic is channel transformation from supplier to customers. There's so much going on in this area. We've got some excellent information for you today and some recommendations. My name is Ian Heller with Distribution Strategy Group, and I'll be your co-host. But before we get started, I want to thank the NAW Institute for Distribution Excellence for commissioning this research. That's what they do. In fact, they do the Facing the Forces of Change research. The last one was done by Mark Dancer, who's a real distribution expert. So if you don't have that research, I suggest you to go to naw.org and buy it off of their website. And for those of you who may not know, the NAW represents tens of thousands of distributors in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. The industry does more than $7 trillion in revenue. It's more than a quarter of US GDP. And NAW is known for its federal government relations program, its political action committee, the NAW Service Corporation, which provides some group purchasing benefits, as well as the NAW Institute's research activities. Now, a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Please know that you have joined the presentation in listening mode using your computer speakers. If you would prefer to join by phone, just select the cleverly named telephone tab in the audio pane and you'll see the dial-in information. We encourage questions, so please feel free to submit questions anytime using the questions pane in your attendee control panel. We'll answer some questions as we go and some along the way. Today's webinar is being recorded and we'll send you a follow-up email with a link to view the recording, which you can find at naw.org/go/adding-value, as well as a detailed research report that will be coming soon. Now I want to bring in a serial entrepreneur, an actual college professor, and my business partner and co-host. He's the Doctor of Distribution, Jonathan Bine, PhD. Jonathan, how are you today, my friend?
I am doing great, and
Good.
I am now on screen, I hope. Yes.
You are. Fantastic. Okay, so let's go through the agenda real quick. We're not going to spend too much time in this because obviously this is the content that we're covering. But we're going to talk about a survey that we did in which manufacturers are predicting major shifts in channel share away from distributors and into some other channels. We're going to talk about the role of marketplaces in this channel evolution, which is related. We're going to identify some forces that are driving this disruption. And most importantly, we're going to end with some recommendations based on a lot of research that we've done on how distributors should respond to this channel disruption. But before we get to any of that, I want to thank the sponsor of today's webinar, because without them, this research and analysis or this webinar would not be possible. So please welcome my friend Ranga Bodla, who is the Vice President, Field Engagement and Marketing for NetSuite, which is a global business unit at Oracle. Ranga, thanks so much for your support and welcome to the webinar. Please spend a couple of minutes telling our audience about what you offer for wholesale distributors.
Thank you so much, Ian, and so glad to be here. And of course, with Jonathan and being here for this series. I think it's a great series, really covering some of the challenges and trends that are happening in the distribution world. So just, you know, as you introduced me, my role, I run our go-to-market at industries on the industry side here at Oracle NetSuite. I'll go in a moment and talk a little bit about Oracle NetSuite, but I think that's actually on the next slide. If you'll go forward, Jonathan. Sorry, Ian. So I actually need to update this slide, but we are actually now at 26,000 customers worldwide, and over 6,000 new logos in the last 12 months. But just the background of who we are. You know, we were founded in 1998, so before cloud was even really cloud, honestly. And you know, from the beginning, our founder, Evan Goldberg, who's still with the organization, had a vision of providing a complete platform, ERP, CRM, and commerce to companies, you know, of all sizes. You know, he wanted to provide the small companies with the tools that big companies had, and vice versa. And in 2016, Oracle saw that our fast growth and decided to acquire us. And we've thrived under Oracle. We now operate as a global business unit. But to your question, you know, we operate, we do count a number of distributors as our customers. The beauty of NetSuite and what makes us such a great system is we have distributors, manufacturers, retailers that all use the system, and you've you guys are at the forefront of this, but you're seeing those lines blur, and NetSuite's a great platform for those companies to be able to leverage that. If you go to the next slide, just to talk a little bit about maybe, this is just a few things that we talk about. Oh, we went too far forward.
Sorry, Roger, there's a delay here, so I'm trying to
Oh, it's okay.
figure out. There it is.
If you go back one, yep.
One more.
Yep.
Actually, sorry about that. I've never done a webinar before. All right, try
Hey,
that.
it's these little things. It's okay.
Well, there's often like a 1 second delay, but now it's like a 5 second delay. So I'm having to slow down. So anyway, go ahead.
No, it's good. It's totally fine. And I would say the big thing that we've seen, and this is for big issues that we've seen, particularly in the distribution area, that we're really focused on around technology and how we can help solve that. And that is financial visibility, fragmented data, supply chain resilience, and even responsiveness, and then e-commerce. And particularly in the distribution side of things, we really see that financial visibility being that foundation. This notion of fragmented data really came to life in the last year, where distributors really needed to understand how is their business operating, and when they needed to make decisions and make them quickly, they needed that there. Supply chain responsiveness, being able to address issues in the supply chain and be able to move on them quickly. And then last but not least is e-commerce, and be able to support the e-commerce channel. And the last slide really is just a visual view into NetSuite as an overall platform delivered in the cloud. Many of our customers talk about the value that they have with NetSuite, which is they can access it from anywhere. And that really came to life in the last year, where so many of our distributors had to basically leave very few people in the office, if at all, and send everybody else home. And many of our customers were able to really go and move forward and not skip a beat. So we really value distribution. It was really our first major vertical that we went after. And like I said, pleased to be here and be part of the conversation, Ian.
Hey, Roger, real quickly, your logo, I mean, that slide that had 4,500 logos on it, that's just a month or two old, or a few months old, and you're at 6,000 now. So I'm assuming that all this work from home, like you mentioned, that drove a lot of people into more cloud systems. Is that where that's coming from?
I think you're seeing some of that. We're seeing acceleration of folks that are in its replacement cycle.
Yeah.
People are seeing that their systems are just, if they've got an old on-premise system, they want to be able to take advantage of these trends that are happening in the industry, and so they're looking to upgrade their technology, and so that's driving the growth. And NetSuite itself, we've done our own growth, where we're trying to make sure we support not just small guys, but large guys and in between. And I didn't have that on the slide, but in the last year, in this year, the first half of this year alone, over 75 companies have gone public on NetSuite, and that's just staggering, man. And many of those companies started on NetSuite, just handful of people, and then grew to IPO.
Got it. Okay, well, thank you not only for sponsoring this webinar, but for sponsoring the whole series. We really appreciate it, and we enjoy working with you. And I'm glad you're going to be on the call if anybody has any questions directed at your material. So thanks, Ranga. We're going to move on to the content of the seminar, or the webinar now.
Awesome.
And
thanks, Ian. Thanks, Sean.
You bet. Thanks, Ranga. So let's talk about what's happening in terms of channel transformation from supplier to customer, because there's a tremendous amount of shift going on. So, Jonathan, we've asked this question, I think, in 3 surveys now, right? So we've compiled in the last 8 months, maybe, 167 responses. And by the way, I deduped this list by IP address. So there may be a couple of dupes in here, but for the most part, this is unique data, unique people responding. And we're asking, how do you expect your sales through each of these channels to change over the next 5 years? And it's not a good story for traditional distributors, right?
It's absolutely eye-opening. I think this is one of the most powerful pieces of data we've unearthed in this research that we've done, is exactly what's happening with manufacturers and how they're planning to go to market.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that this, or one of the interesting things is that this, 12.7% drop, or 1,270 basis points, I think it would be the number, is a bigger number for the distributors, because distributors get almost all their revenue out of what they buy from manufacturers. So proportionally, it's even bigger. And I know these numbers here look small, right? But if you look at the actual change, so these are basis point changes, but if you look at the actual change in the drop in sales that traditional distributors are seeing versus other channels like pure digital distributors, which, and these are not marketplaces per se, they're buying from manufacturers, but they have a pure e-commerce function. A lot of them don't have any or very little inventory. And if you look at the actual change on a percentage basis, what you're seeing is a 20% drop that manufacturers are expecting to get through their traditional distributors versus 80% growth from pure digital distributors and marketplaces, and small growth in retail channels and direct end customer. And this has been consistent. We've seen this data for a while. Now, that's why, you need to look at this on a percentage change and not just what's the actual proportion, because if you pile an 80% change on year after year after year, or on a 5-year basis, you're going to see those numbers become a very substantial part of what is today the revenue going through traditional distributors, right?
Absolutely. And one of the interesting things that we're doing in other research is looking at where manufacturers are introducing e-commerce that goes direct to the end customer. And we've looked at about 1,000 companies so far, over 50 million in revenue. We're going to look at another 3,000 or 4,000 in the course of the research. But part of what we've seen is that there are entire sectors, as defined by an SIC, where 20% of the manufacturers are already going direct through e-commerce to the end customer. So that fear, that sort of drumbeat that we heard beginning in around 2000 of, wow, manufacturers are going to start going direct, it's really starting to manifest.
Yeah, and so in the survey that we just did, which was all manufacturers, we asked them about what are the factors that are driving this change in your distribution strategy, and we asked them to rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. Look at number 1, Jonathan. This doesn't surprise you, I'm sure.
Yeah, and we're actually engaged with some manufacturers who are looking at just that in their channel, right?
They're frustrated.
Yeah.
And second is, so first, our distributors don't have good digital capabilities. That was made worse in the last year when you really needed them more than ever. Secondly, our end customers just prefer other channels. Third, distributors don't do a good job representing my brand. I mean, that's a relatively low score. So I think I'd focus on the first one in particular. But the days of a digital capability being optional are over. Now, we're going to give you some information later in this webcast about how to do it right, because we think a lot of distributors are doing it wrong and they're measuring it wrong as well. And so that's diminished the investment in digital. So, but clearly the manufacturers that we surveyed in this just a couple of weeks ago are saying you have to get digital fast. And that's consistent with other research that we've done over the years. Now let's see here. Sorry for the lag. We did get some comments from these distributors, and I'm just going to read a few. The more technical the product, the more distributors are important.
Go back a slide in.
Yeah, I'm trying. There's a several second delay, and so sometimes I hit it twice because I think it's not working. One more, I think. Basically they're saying, look, if we sell more technical products and we need the help of a sales rep or a phone staff or whatever, distributors are great. But the second bullet is they're not making the necessary digital investments for digital natives. But you get different answers, right? Some people are happier with their distributors than others. We had a lot of comments on this. I'm just presenting a handful and I'm bolding the ones that I think we actually need to share with this particular audience. Some of the manufacturers really value their distribution partners. And I kind of like this third bullet, Jonathan. I believe distributors should feel more confident about the value they bring to the supply chain, especially the distributors that invest in local inventory. End users depend on the service, and this is a really important thing, and I think sometimes we don't take credit for the good things that we do.
I think a lot of the comments here depend on what the manufacturer is expecting from the channel, right? So we're going to talk more about this later on, but to the extent that your products have either significant logistic requirements or they have significant value-added requirements, you're going to get one response from the manufacturer. To the extent that the manufacturer doesn't have a significant logistic or value add, you're going to get a different response from the manufacturer.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we do have someone at the bottom who said, hey, we're going to go more direct to our customers because we're doing things our distributors will not provide. And so, there is this sense of frustration, and some more selling direct and some more selling to marketplaces. So, we wanted to know, okay, then what can distributors do to become more important to you? Number one, improve customer-facing employees' understanding of our products. Look at the score on that one, Jonathan.
Yeah, and I think, if we had predicted where these responses would come out prior to the survey, I think we would have predicted this would be pegged kind of like it is, right? I mean, it's close to 100%. So in a sense, that means it's table stakes, that the manufacturers think that your understanding of their products is table stakes.
It's the differentiator in many ways, right? And when I go to a conference, there's always some speaker who says, how many of you have an Amazon Prime account? And I always ask instead, how many of you have ever telephoned Amazon to place an order? Well, nobody raises their hand because nobody has. And so that is a real differentiator. Customers want to call and talk to somebody or their sales rep, but those people have to understand the products. And then secondly, you have to have great digital capabilities. But the third one surprised me a little bit. You have to have better marketing capabilities, which you and I have thought is important, but a lot of distributors haven't invested in over the years.
In this decade, it's more important than ever before, right? I mean, the role of marketing and sales is changing in this decade. And it's not that the role of marketing is going to eclipse sales, it's just going to have a more prominent place.
Yeah, I think anytime you become more digital, then marketing becomes more important because inherently promoting online sales is a marketing function. And a couple of comments here, distributors need to be more transparent. So this came out quite a bit in the data where manufacturers are saying, look, distributors are reluctant to share information with us about end users and about opportunities, but the ones who do, we have a great relationship with and we can really create a lot of value. But on the other hand, if manufacturers are going to sell direct, it's hard for distributors to be willing to do that. So there's this two-way trust that has to exist in the relationship.
Right.
We also asked about marketplaces, and we said, how important will they be to your end customers over the next 5 years? And, fully half are saying much more important or more important. There's a big group that says, I don't know, or it's going to be the same as today, and only 2% thought they were going to be less important. So you can't ignore them. They're coming, and you have to have a strategy on how you're going to respond to them. And one of the things you need to do is formulate a marketplace strategy, right? So we asked, okay, well, these are the comments on how important they're going to be. And this first bullet point, I think, is accurate in many cases. Marketplaces are setting the standards that in a lot of distributors can't meet. And if you have slow delivery or lead times, opaque pricing, and unnecessary costs, then you're consistently or you're increasingly out of sync with customers' expectations. So following up on that, we asked, okay, which marketplaces are you selling on today? It was interesting to me that 35, and this one is a relatively small data set. 35 of them said we don't sell on any marketplaces. Amazon or Amazon Business was the #1 marketplace. Look at Zoro though. Did that surprise you, Jonathan?
It really did, especially given Zoro's focus on distributors, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think my personal view is Zoro has this moment in time or this short period of time where they can define themselves as the default partner for distributors. And they're clearly in the lead, and it'll be interesting to see if they do that because the successful place for distributors to sell in the long run is going to be a place that they trust not to compete with them, because as we're going to cover later, that's a big problem with a lot of these marketplaces, is that ultimately you're partnering with a competitor who may abuse your data, so to speak, or at least use it in ways to help them compete with you. And so we also ask these manufacturers, okay, what should be the role of traditional distributors when it comes to marketplaces? And this was really interesting because the number one answer was distributors should each build their own marketplaces, which is a little surprising, I think, because, you know, for the manufacturers, that is, you know, they may feel like, well, I've already got a marketplace channel, I don't really need another one. But they're saying distributors should build their own marketplaces. And the number two answer was distributors should band together to form a marketplace that is competitive with Amazon Business. So this is an industry-based Amazon Business competitor that they're supporting. And I think that indicates manufacturers not being very trusting in Amazon potentially. And it had, you know, really relatively low negatives below the line there. A distant third was distributors should sell through marketplaces operated by other companies. And those are really the only alternatives worth talking about in terms of distributor marketplace strategy. There are a number of manufacturers who are saying, hey, we already treat marketplaces as channel partners and we're going to sell on them directly. So what you have any takeaways from this, Jonathan?
I think number two, distributors should band together. I think that's a big call to action that echoes your sentiment on this whole thing, Ian, right?
Yeah.
We're going to solve this together rather than separately. And the first category, it takes a distributor of a certain size to pull that off, right? You have to be a certain scale to do the first option. But for the rest of us, or even including some of those players, banding together could be very powerful.
Yeah, well, you know, I've been advocating this for a while, right? I mean, to me, this is the call to arms. This is the going on offense because, you know, Amazon doesn't attack individual companies. They invent a new business model that undermines an industry, right? They've done it over and over again. And that's what they're trying to do in wholesale distribution. And given that they reported $25 billion in sales the last time, and annual sales for Amazon Business alone, the last time they updated us, it appears to be working. And I think, you know, a partnership of distributors, some technology companies and some logistics companies could develop a marketplace that actually has advantages over Amazon Business. The problem is industries aren't really set up to respond as industries to competitors. And so you've got, you know, individual companies trying to fight back against Amazon Business, and that I don't see that working as well, maybe not at all.
Mm-hmm.
So we asked for some commentary on this from these manufacturers about, you know, what are the roles of traditional distributors in marketplaces, and there's some, not everybody agrees, right? Like you would imagine on strategic options, as we know, and we're going to cover this in a few minutes. If you have a lot of technical requirements for your product, Amazon's a tough sell. It's just not a good place for it because they can't do value-added services or really provide technical advice. May change someday, may not. And there are other manufacturers who feel like, you know, you're just going to drive prices down if you put everybody on the same platform. But all in all, I think the data is supporting distributors building their own marketplaces or coming together to, you know, build one to compete with Amazon Business. Now, we asked a follow-up question. So, okay, how effective do you believe each of these organizations, some of which exist, some of which do not, would be as a place for your end customers to buy your products? Okay, so, you know, manufacturers, if you could choose the ideal marketplace for your customers, what would it be? And this is really interesting because Amazon Business came in first in terms of being rated as effective, but it also had very, very big negatives below the line.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the second place choice was almost as positive. This is a new marketplace organized by major distributors working together. This is what we're just talking about, right? A rival to Amazon Business that's collaborative, or it's a collaboration between major distributors. Very few negatives and almost as high in terms of effectiveness, even though it doesn't even exist right now. Amazon Business does exist. They know what that will do. And here, this fictional one, just an idea, scored almost as high in terms of positives, and it had very few negatives, and Zora was right behind it. And that's why I'm saying Zorro has the opportunity to be that second place, that collaborative marketplace. So,
Mhm.
you know, we don't have any insights into what Zorro's strategies are. We don't have a relationship with him. I would just say, if I was at Grainger, I would look at this data. And if I was at any distributor, I'd look at this data and say, look, there's an opportunity to build out that second spot, whether it's AD or iMark or, you know, Fastenal or Grainger or DigiKey or whomever. Man, if you could get this collaborative marketplace together and really be the trusted marketplace that has, you know, assortment and logistics and technology offerings that were competitive with Amazon Business, I think you'd get a lot of support from manufacturers because they just don't trust Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The hypothetical is scoring better than the actual.
Yeah, overall, the average score is better for the hypothetical.
Right.
And you know, it's funny. I had this experience yesterday where I was looking for reviews on something, and I went on Amazon and I realized I don't trust the reviews anymore.
Hmm.
And to me, that's been one of the best things. But since they've turned those star rankings and that into an advertising model, and they make like 20 billion or something a year, probably more than that now. I just kind of feel like I don't know that I trust these reviews anymore. And that used to be one of the best things about buying on Amazon. I think when you erode that trust, you know, you really detract from the value of it.
There's a lot of gamification. And so even if you said, well, I'm just going to figure out how to handicap the reviews, you don't even know how to handicap them, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah. So it's there's an opportunity here, and I hope that, you know, someone in the industry takes a lead in you know, building out this alternative. So when we asked, okay, well, you know, give us some comments on the previous question, you know, look what came up: distributor field reps, and we strongly believe that the time is over for outside reps only if you don't use them well. And if you make them true business consultants for your customers and value-added partners, then it is a more valuable role than ever. And I think you could say the same for branches, right? It's not that those are outdated. It's the way that you use them may be outdated, and you need to make sure your outside sales reps and your branches are truly focused on value, because if they are, then you can do things for your customers that marketplaces generally cannot. So, and then you have another trust comment that came at the bottom, right? I do not trust these marketplaces, and they're gonna, same way a lot of distributors feel, manufacturers feel the same. If I give them my information, or if they get my information because I sell to them, they are going to abuse that data. Okay, so we
had a question here before we
Great.
move to this.
Okay.
So an important question would be, how effectively are the vendors partnering with their distributors to help them be effective on the web? Our experience is that nearly none have the data in a format to help their distributors populate their company websites. This is really about digital.
So at the end of that, they're saying that manufacturers are not helping them?
Yeah, this particular distributor is saying that our experience is that nearly none of the manufacturers have the data in a format to help their distributors populate their company websites.
That's not my experience. Is it yours?
It varies.
Okay.
We were doing an e-commerce initiative with one of our clients, and they had a major manufacturer, and we thought, wow, you know, this manufacturer is surely going to have all the data we need. Well, it turned out the organization was very decentralized. There were all these different divisions. The data was not in a common format. So I think the answer is it just depends. There's some industries that have it pretty well together. There's some manufacturers that have it pretty well together, and others it's a mess. So
yeah, and like the electrical industry has been ahead of the curve for a long time, right?
Way ahead. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And that, but depending on that's fair. Okay. All right. So I want to contrast. There's this real problem with people understanding how marketplaces drive profits. So I want to contrast it with how distributor drives profits, because it's really important to understand this to make long-term strategic choices about your marketplace strategy, and understanding how the competitive dynamics are shifting, and also understanding where you can compete in ways that marketplaces probably cannot. So I created this slide called Joe's MRO, and if you look at from year 1 to year 5, right? So that's year 1 on the left, year 5 on the right. The green line is that, Joe's is trying to drive sales growth over time, right? So you want that green line to go up. And you need that to generate profits because your variable costs are also going up, right? And so the term operating leverage means that you are driving sales growth faster than your variable costs. It's really gross profit growth faster than your variable costs. And so you're becoming more profitable over time. So if you're able to become more profitable over time, you have operating leverage, okay? But no matter how good you are at doing that, you have significant variable costs. So even in a single order, if when a distributor goes to fulfill that order, they've got inventory they've invested in, so they have working capital or inventory carrying costs. They're paying someone to pick, pack, and ship the order, and there may be value-added services such as having someone on the phone who can answer questions and help the customer pick the product, just in a very basic way. So over time, you have to add resources to support that sales growth. That's what variable costs are. Underlying that is a foundation of fixed costs that, at least over the course of a few years, aren't variable as sales grow. Okay, so this is sort of the basic way that people look at this sort of a visual representation of a distributor P&L. Now, let's say for a minute that Joe's decides that they want to sell through Amazon Business as a third-party seller, right? So Joe's is going to get the orders. They're not going to generate the orders. That's going to be Amazon Business that's going to do that. Joe's is going to, however, hold the inventory. They're going to do the picking and packing and the shipping, so they're operating as normal. The difference is that they're selling through Amazon Business. Okay, so what you'll see in that relationship, and this is true of distributors, it's true of retailers, is that in this relationship, when Amazon or Amazon Business is relying on third-party sellers to fulfill the orders, they have removed all the variable costs from their business, or most of the variable costs from their business. Okay, so if somebody buys $1,000 drill press from Joe's, but they bought it on Amazon Business, then Amazon Business is electronically processing that order. They never touch it. Nobody talks to a customer. It's not their inventory they're picking out of. It's not their labor that's doing the picking and packing and the shipping. And Joe's is paying for all of that variable cost. And at Amazon Business, their net profit as a percentage is actually growing faster over time and is greater probably than Joe's is as a third-party seller. Okay, so yeah, let's say Joe's has a 30% gross margin, and then they take their cost outs and they're making a 10% bottom line profit, EBIT, whatever. Okay, now Amazon Business doesn't really have a gross margin, right? So they're charging Joe's a transaction fee. That transaction fee may be 10, 12, 20%, depending on who you believe. Actually, it's probably 12 to 24, depending on based on the data that we see. Well, that transaction fee is not gross margin dollars for Amazon Business. That transaction fee is actually bottom line profit for every incremental dollar that they get, because the fixed costs are already in place. The system to process the transactions is already in place. The customers are already coming to Amazon Business to search for the order. So over time, Amazon Business is becoming increasingly more profitable than Joe's MRO, and probably makes more money on that transaction than the distributor does today. Is that pretty clear, Jonathan?
100% clear. Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
the cost to serve is just taken out of it's your cost to serve. Your cost to serve their profit.
Yeah, and what's interesting is those two green lines are exactly the same. I moved it over, they're in the exact same position, but look at the amount of net profit that Amazon Business generates and how much more it increases over time. The operating leverage on every dollar of sales is just enormous compared to a traditional business model. And you have to understand this. because, I've heard people say, well, Amazon business is making 12, 20%. I got a 30% gross margin. Yeah, but they don't have any variable costs. So they're actually making more profit than you are on your sales. So what's the long-term prognosis for distributors? You are going to become less price competitive over time, because Amazon, because of this greater gross profit, is going to make more money than you do in the short term, and they're going to become more profitable over time, which is going to give them pricing power. It's going to give them marketing dollars to work with. I mean, this is really important.
Yeah, you're feeding the beast.
Yeah. So, and you're giving them the data to get better at this over time. And so I think what distributors have to understand, and actually we just got a message from the moderator that there's a global problem with GoToMeeting delays right now, so it ain't just us. But so you have to remember, when you're selling on marketplaces, the marketplace operator, they know your customers, your SKUs, your pricing, your suppliers. They're getting all kinds of data. They own the customer relationship, and they may use your data against you. And there've been a lot of claims of this, and the Wall Street Journal has published a couple of them. But it's got to be a concern that you're sharing data that they can use against you. So when you that all sounds bad, right? It's like, oh man, that's not good. Or, I mean, they could use my data against me. But in reality, that's not the worst part of it, right? The worst part of it, which hopefully will come back on the slide in a minute, there it is that we don't think this is the end game for marketplaces. Not all of them, but certainly the marketplaces like Amazon and Amazon Business and some others, Walmart.com probably. Our prediction is that we have moved from the channel structure on the left, which was the traditional channel structure in distribution. The manufacturer would send product to the distributor would send product to the customer, and basically resell, add value. There's this interim structure for these simple transactions, which is that the manufacturer is selling to the distributor, who is selling, like Joe's MRO is, as a third-party seller through the marketplace, which is going to the customer. We predict the end game for these marketplaces. The plan, the strategy, is to remove the distributor from the channel and split the profits and the work with the manufacturers, because lots and lots of manufacturers have learned over the years how to pick, pack, and ship small orders. Distributors are partly responsible for that because they've asked their manufacturers to do that. And because these transactions are pretty simple and they're small orders, and manufacturers can do small orders now when they have their own warehouses, it's going to be more profitable in the long term for these marketplaces to take the distributors out, and it's a less complex channel structure. So, what do you think, Jonathan?
I think you're right. I mean, the market is going to find its efficiency over time. We have a good question here related to marketplaces that would be good to clarify here. As a distributor with e-com capabilities, aren't we already like a marketplace, bringing multiple manufacturers together to provide a single source for our customers?
So a marketplace is a platform, and the value comes from the connections, not from the assets. Okay, so no, you're not a marketplace. And
it's also multiple sellers.
Sorry?
Also multiple sellers. I mean, I think that's a defining aspect, right?
Well, so a marketplace creates enormous assortment and creates value by establishing connections that didn't previously exist. And the value comes from the connections, not from the assets. Okay, so eBay does not own any inventory, but it's a very valuable company by connecting buyers and sellers so that they can give visibility to each other that wasn't previously available. Uber is not doesn't own any vehicles other than some special financing deals they do for some drivers, but they're the biggest transportation company in the world. Airbnb is the largest hospitality company in the world, but it doesn't own any hotels, and we could go on and on. Match.com, for people who are looking for relationships, doesn't benefit by its resources. It has fixed costs, and then people subscribe, and you're able to connect people who previously could not find each other. So the list of marketplaces goes on and on, but sort of the universal characteristics are, it's not the assets that make them valuable. They do not have variable costs in the way that a regular business does, so they can become extraordinarily profitable and relatively quickly. And very importantly, they create assortment that a traditional retailer or distributor can't match, right? So Amazon supposedly has 500 million SKUs. And, so if you think about like Walmart's traditional merchandising would be like a distributor's, right? I've got X number of space on my shelves on my warehouse. So that's a constraint, right? And so I have to take the universe of products that are available out there, and I have to fit them into my Walmart store. I have to fit them into my electrical supply house, or I have to fit them into my power transmission distribution building. Marketplaces do not have that constraint. Not only do they not have a physical real estate constraint, they don't have an assortment constraint, because other people are providing the assets and other people are providing the variable expense. And so that allows for extraordinary profitability, and it creates an incredible range of assortment that people find addicting. And this is a really good question, because I understand that people are concerned or confused sometimes. But I remember when Grainger had 2 million SKUs, and it was awesome, right? And they get a lot of orders just because people could go there and they could, get everything in one PO. And that just seemed like this unbeatable value proposition. Well, I think, Grainger may have 7 or 8 or maybe 10 million SKUs. But it's probably no more than that across their businesses. Now compare that to Amazon business, which is probably at 50 million by itself, or 100 million, and everybody on there has access to the other 400 million that Amazon sells. I mean, if it's easy to go there and get stuff done because you can get such a wide variety of things in one place conveniently. Jonathan, we know from our research, buyers want us to make their jobs easier. It's just easy to have a superior assortment. And so people have often said you can't out Amazon, but in Amazon Business, they have out distributed a lot of distributors for the non-complex transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help? I hope.
I think that's a great answer. Yeah.
Okay. Well, but if this is the end goal for marketplaces, then distributors are going to have to come up with new strategies, because the traditional channel is consolidating. Now, it's not consolidating in every way, but we do see some support for this already happening, right? So this is several months ago. The number's probably bigger now, but we went and looked at 40 manufacturers that we know have traditionally sold through distribution. We're not telling you who they are, but we've been in distribution for a long time. So we chose manufacturers that have just traditionally been primarily in the durable goods category of distribution. And we just went on Amazon and Amazon Business to see if they had their own stores and if they were fulfilling their orders directly. 30 out of 40 are already treating Amazon and Amazon Business as a distributor, so that third channel structure that we showed is already happening. The manufacturer is, in the case of Amazon and Amazon Business, is treating them as a distributor. They're doing the fulfillment. Amazon's doing the demand generation and the transaction processing with no real variable costs. Manufacturers bearing the variable costs, and that is how marketplaces displace traditional distributors, at least for some of the orders. So this stuff is underway. So in order to give you, go ahead.
Great comment from a listener here. If a customer is looking for an MRO SKU, they may or may not care how many other millions of SKUs a marketplace has. Sure. They may just want the SKU they want, and then they move on to the next thing they need. Our customers don't shop, they buy, and the efficiency and effectiveness of the buying experience can be a differentiator.
Yeah, I mean, we're not predicting distributors are all going to go away. We think they're going to adapt. But if I need something really quickly, particularly if I need a variety of very different things, most distributors aren't the best place to go for that.
But what he's pointing out is this distinction that we've researched between shopping and buying. If they are buying, not shopping, they don't care about the other 500 million minus one SKU. They care about the one SKU. And so
absolutely.
And so the emphasis on the buying experience rather than the shopping, which is assortment and variety, it's a slightly different use case, and it's a good one.
Absolutely, and in fact, it's a beautiful lead-in to our next topic, which is something we put together earlier this year called the distributor relative value model. And so what that person just described is a relatively simple transaction, but they were very confident the distributor had it, right? Because they started with the distributor, so they must have, they if there's doubt, you feel like you have to shop around. This person in this use case didn't. But generally speaking, those types of orders where there are really simple logistics requirements, I'm going to pick it off of a shelf and I'm going to put it in a common carrier, or in Amazon's case, their own fleet, or the product services and information requirements. So it's easy to pick out. I don't need any, product transformation. I don't need anything cut or configured or labeled or whatever. Those simple and standardized transactions in terms of logistics requirements, product services and information requirements are in the bottom left of this value model. A lot of what distributors do does involve cutting, configuring, putting fittings on, etc., or it's big and heavy and hard to deliver. That stuff is in the right top part of this model. And if you look at where the disruptors in the industry are focusing, it tends to be on the bottom left, right? So Amazon has tremendous logistics capability, but it's very simple. It's designed for simple order delivery. You've got panel trucks that are kind of like UPS trucks, and they don't do custom delivery, and you can't call them and get product selection assistance. And so these disruptors, for the most part, with a pretty significant exception in Home Depot, in many ways is scarier than Amazon by a lot in certain channels, they are in this bottom left, set of quadrants, but there's a whole bunch of revenue down there. And this is where they're trying to dominate. Jonathan, what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, if we're saying that distribution is a $7 trillion market, this could be 5 trillion, maybe even 5.5 trillion of the 7 trillion, right?
Even if it's not, it's usually the most profitable, both because it's higher margin and it's lower cost to serve.
Right.
This is pretty easy business to fulfill. You're not spending a lot of time with your value-added services down here. And so since these disruptors don't really offer value-added services the way that distributors do, they're going for this part of the market, which to your point is probably really big. It's a big part of the market, and they're able to do this in many cases better than a distributor. Now, so when we talk to distributors, we tell them, look, here's a list of value-added services. We just picked some at random. You could put your own on this chart. But the more that you do things that are in the yellow and red, in other words, they require more complex logistics capabilities or more complex product services and information capabilities, the more you move away from that simple standardized stuff. So we're not saying you need to give up on that, because we do think you need a marketplace strategy. And when we say distributors should collaborate and build a marketplace, or they should build their own marketplace, that's all in an effort to get back some of that stuff in the red that's hemorrhaging over into other channels. But at the same time, start building some moats around the stuff that you do really well, which are these services. Do you think distributors are getting the message, Jonathan?
Sort of. I think the industry still needs to understand this distinction between simple and complex transactions. So, for example, the person who asked the question about shopping versus buying is in an industry where there are more complex product, service, and information requirements, lower logistic requirements. And we know that the companies in that industry have not been leaders in e-commerce because of that, right? Because there is higher product, service, and information value add by the distributor, it doesn't lend itself as well to being put in a shopping cart. That being said, there are still plenty of simple transactions that can go through the shopping cart. But I think that's a place where companies in that industry have been stymied by really not understanding that distinction.
Yeah, and I think this is really important strategically, because one of the benefits of competing against really smart companies is they tend to be very deliberate about what they're not going to do. And so while Amazon or Amazon Business may start offering some of those services in the top right, they're unlikely to do them themselves. They're more likely to contract them out. and they're actually not likely to do a lot of them, and because it violates their no variable cost model. So they could choose not to do that anymore. But for now, it looks like they're going to avoid variable costs, and so it's
and
really
non-standardized things.
yeah,
Right.
right. Yeah, non-standardized things and various product ads. And so we're going to come back to these services in a minute, but we get a lot of distributors who say, hey, you know what, my digital capabilities are failing, right? And so when we talk to them, what we discover is that when they measure when they design and their websites and measure them, they're not really doing it the way they should, in our opinion. And so they're not building these capabilities to compete for those small orders in the bottom left quadrant because they don't have the digital capabilities that customers want in order to execute purchases that way. And when we ask them what their ROI model is, Jonathan, it's usually something like this. Well, here's my shopping cart sales, and here's my gross margin dollars out of them. That's the benefit that I get from my website. That's the numerator. And underneath that, or I divide that by my e-commerce capital cost that I'm amortizing and my e-commerce expenses, which is my e-commerce team, my web hosting fees that I pay every month, et cetera. And it doesn't look good, right? So I don't get a lot of sales in my shopping cart. It's really disappointing. My e-commerce team was wrong about their predictions. And so I have a pretty negative ROI. And so I don't want to continue to invest in e-commerce because it failed. My customers aren't going to buy from me that way. And so this leads to what we call the e-commerce doom loop, where, well, it didn't work, let's invest less. That didn't work either, let's invest less. And over time, the gap in digital capabilities between marketplaces and pure digital distributors versus traditional distributors grows. I mean, this is what we see most of the time, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And we think this is a wrong measurement, okay? And so, I mean, one of the beautiful things you've done over the years, Jonathan, is you've done this shopping versus buying distinction. And so it's kind of silly to measure e-commerce benefit on credit card sales or even open account sales to a shopping cart, and that's really not how most of the orders come in, right? People are emailing UPOs, and they've got, or they want to call and talk to someone for whatever reason, or they call their rep, and they want to see, if they can get some help or some confirmation that they're buying the right thing. And so a lot of times they are shopping online, but they're not buying online, right?
Right. Yeah, our research shows that, and this research is buoyed by other research. 75% of the people are shopping online, researching, evaluating, assessing. But if only 10% of the e-commerce, if companies are only getting 10% e-commerce revenue, where is that other 65% going? Well, it's not going online, right? And it's going to these places that you're mentioning. It's orders generated by the website, but placed via other channels. We liken this to, I'm going to use two current examples. Trae Young for the Atlanta Hawks, Chris Paul for the Phoenix Suns. These guys are point guards. They do the assist, somebody else scores the points. That's really the way to be thinking about your e-commerce site. Of course, it's great when the point guard scores also. It can be a Steph Curry. But the primary role of the point guard is to assist other people in scoring. And then increasingly, that's what we're seeing as a winning strategy for e-commerce.
Exactly. And so the shopping cart sales are just a start of the measurement, because that's the point scored by the point guard, to use your analogy. But there are a lot of orders that are placed because of your website, but they come through other channels, and people say, well, yeah, I can't know what that is. I'm like, okay, well, assuming zero isn't accurate, right? So why don't you call 100 people a month who place some order with you over the phone and ask them, did you look at the website when you put this order together? Okay, that's not a very exact measurement either, but it's a lot more accurate than just assuming zero. And so maybe you say, you know what, the website played an important role. We're going to give half the credit of the transaction to the website. We're going to extrapolate that 100 out to all of our orders, or whatever. I mean, there are better ways to measure the revenue impact of your website than just assuming it's all zero if it's not the shopping cart. And And then there are other effects too, right? Like we've seen over the years that customers that buy through multiple channels, they're bigger than customers who don't, right? So maybe you just look at to see if there's a statistical difference between customers who are otherwise similar and those who do buy online from time to time. And your online capability is a great way to drive customer lifecycle performance, right? So these are digital capabilities that drive customer acquisition, onboarding, retention, et cetera. So you need to add all that up and then divide that by your cost to really understand the benefit of your website, right?
Absolutely.
So let's end on services. This is the last topic we're going to discuss. We get this dissonance where we ask distributors how important services are, and they almost universally say they're essential to our strategy, but they actually aren't measuring their performance. There's no general manager for services. They don't have any financial measurements. They're not charging for them. They don't standardize their processes and measure the quality or survey their customers about their needs. And so part of what we're saying is if you really want to be good at services, you have to build in a service development process, put someone in charge of it and do a services P&L. And this stuff is really important. You know, I spoke at to a bunch of hose and accessory distributors a week or two ago for NAHAD, and these guys are not worried about Amazon because the vast majority of their sales are transformed. You know, they have hose reels and fittings, and most of what goes out the front is some assembly of that and valves and some other things. You could say they looked into that. Well, maybe, but they built that industry has built that set of value-added services over the years, and they're doing all that configuration. So, that's an important set of configurations or important set of capabilities, and you need to see what you can do to duplicate that in your own business. So, here's our recommendations. Prepare for simple transactions, migrating to marketplaces. Remember that the end state for them is probably to eliminate intermediaries, make your services, branches, and sales reps long-term differentiators, build digital capabilities, but measure them better, and develop a marketplace strategy. There's some links in here that go back to this series at NAW to provide you with some information about this. Anything you want to add before I do the last minute wrap up, Jonathan?
Just focus on this distinction between simple and complex and figure out how you can create a moat with complex.
Fantastic. Okay, so the next webinar in this series is on August 10th, and this is really important. And Rongo and Oracle will be back, or NetSuite will be back to talk about this because that ERP is such a foundational part of this kind of thing. And so you'll hear from him again. Then we'll go into our own analysis of technology. It's emerging and traditional technology requirements to compete in the long term in all the ways that we described today. You can access the whole series by going to naw.org/go/adding value. Sorry for the lag today. Really appreciate you attending. Hope it wasn't too distracting. And if you want to sponsor the series, please contact Trish Lilly at plilly@naw.org. You can reach Jonathan and I with the contact information on the right. Jonathan, it's great working with you again.
Feelings mutual as always, Ian.
All right, great. Hope you all have a successful July, and we'll see you in August. Bye now.